The sun was high above the Arizona desert, pouring light over the dry land. Dust rolled in the wind as John Miller guided his tired horse along a narrow trail. He was a quiet man, a wanderer who had seen too much of life and wanted only peace. He had worked on cattle ranches and helped settlers build fences. But deep down he longed for silence, a place where the world stopped fighting with itself. He carried only a small bag, his rifle, and a few supplies. Most days he rode without meeting a soul, but that morning felt different. He could sense something wrong in the air. A faint sound came from the canyon ahead, a cry sharp and frightened. He stopped his horse and listened again. It was distant but real. Without thinking much, he turned toward the sound and pressed forward. When he reached the clearing, he saw smoke and movement. A small Apache camp stood there, just a few tents made from animal hides and sticks. People were running. John's heart raced. He could see the fear on their faces and knew they were under attack. His first thought was to ride away to stay clear of trouble. But then he saw a young boy lying near a fire, his leg trapped under a broken pole. Something inside John pushed him to act. He jumped off his horse and hurried forward. The people saw him but didn't stop him. They were too busy trying to help each other. John used all his strength to lift the pole and free the child. The boy gasped for air and clung to John's arm. In the distance, a few riders disappeared beyond the rocks, taking whatever they could carry. The camp was left in confusion, but the danger had passed. John looked around at the frightened faces. He could tell they didn't know what to make of him. He wasn't one of them, and yet he had come to help. An older man with long black hair and calm eyes stepped forward. His clothes were worn but carried an air of dignity. He said something in Apache, a tone that felt like both question and gratitude. John only nodded, unsure how to answer. The older man pointed toward the injured boy and then back at John as if acknowledging what he had done. Then he motioned for John to stay. John hesitated. He didn't want to intrude, but he could see they needed help. So he stayed through the day, repairing tents, calming horses, and sharing what little food he had. When night came, the air turned cool, and the desert sky filled with stars. John sat near the fire, cleaning his old rifle. The older man sat across from him, watching silently. Between them, the wounded boy slept under a blanket. No one spoke for a while. Only the crackling of the fire filled the silence. After some time, a young woman appeared carrying a clay bowl of food. She placed it near John and spoke softly. Her name was Nalin. She was the daughter of the elder. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders and her eyes carried a quiet strength. She smiled gently as if to say thank you, though no words passed between them. John nodded and took the bowl, feeling a strange warmth inside him that had nothing to do with the fire. The following days passed slowly. John helped wherever he could. He gathered firewood, mended a fence, and showed the young men how to patch a torn saddle. The tribe began to trust him, though they still watched him carefully. He noticed how they worked together, how they shared everything, and how they respected their elder. Sometimes when John sat alone at dusk, Nalin would come to sit nearby. She rarely spoke, but she didn't have to. They found comfort in silence. She would hand him a piece of bread or pour water into a cup, and their eyes would meet for a moment that felt longer than it was. One evening, while the sky turned red and gold, the elder came to sit beside John. The man's name was Chief Taza. His face showed the lines of many hard years, but his eyes were still sharp and kind. He spoke slowly, using a mix of broken English and gestures. "You come alone," the elder said. "No tribe, no family," John nodded. "No family. Just work." The chief looked into the fire. "You fight for us today. You help my people." "Good man." John shook his head. "Just did what anyone should." The elder smiled faintly. "Not many do." After that night, the tribe began to treat John as one of their own. They shared stories around the fire, and though John didn't understand every word, he understood their meaning. They sang songs about the wind and the mountains, about loss and new beginnings. It reminded John of the old songs his mother used to hum back in Texas when the world was simpler. He started to feel something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. For the first time, he wasn't just passing through. He was living, breathing, and being seen. One morning, John helped Nalin fetch water from the river. The trail was narrow, lined with wildflowers. They walked in silence at first, but then Nalin pointed to the reflection of the mountains in the water. "Home," she said softly. John smiled. "Beautiful," he answered. She nodded, and for a moment they both watched the river as if it were speaking a language only hearts could hear. That night, when the fire burned low, the tribe gathered. The air was calm, the stars bright above the red cliffs. Chief Taza stood before his people and spoke in a voice that carried power even in its calmness. When he finished, he turned to John. John didn't understand the words, but he could feel the attention of every eye upon him. The elder took a step closer, then spoke in slow English so John could understand. "You saved my people," the chief said, his voice steady. A man's heart shows in his actions. "You saved my tribe." John tried to answer, but the elder raised his hand gently. "No, you listen. I am chief. My word is law. You saved my tribe. Now I give you my daughter as a wife." The words hung in the air like thunder in the distance. John blinked, unsure if he had heard right. Around him, no one moved. The fire crackled softly. He looked toward Nalin, who stood a few steps away, her hands clasped together, her eyes lowered but calm. John's breath caught. He wanted to speak, to explain that he had not done it for reward or gain. He had simply acted because it was right. But when he looked into the elder's face, he saw no pride or force, only sincerity, a gesture born from honor and gratitude. He glanced again at Nalin. She met his eyes for a brief, trembling moment. There was no fear there, only quiet acceptance and maybe something more. A question, a hope. John felt the world slow down around him. He didn't know what to say. The tribe waited. The night air pressed close. Finally, he managed a single nod, unsure what it meant but unable to do otherwise. The elder smiled, not with triumph but with peace. "Then it is done," he said. "You are part of us now." The tribe murmured softly, and the moment passed like a gentle wind. Nalin turned away, her cheeks warm in the firelight. John stood still, his heart caught between wonder and disbelief. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but he knew one thing. The desert no longer felt empty. That night, as he lay under the stars, the sound of distant drums reached him. The people were singing, not for war or sorrow, but for new life, new family. John listened until his eyes closed. For the first time in years, sleep came easily. He had come to this land as a stranger, but now somehow, he felt the earth itself had claimed him. John woke up early the next morning, long before the sun rose over the desert hills. The air was cool and soft, filled with the smell of smoke from the last night's fire. For a few seconds he thought it had all been a dream. The fire, the elder's words, and the quiet eyes of the young woman who was now promised to him. But as he sat up and looked around, he saw the tribe slowly beginning their day, and he knew it was all real. He walked toward the river where the mist hung low above the water. His reflection stared back at him, older than he remembered, with lines of both worry and kindness. He had never thought about marriage again. He had left his home years ago after the war, leaving behind a world of noise and sorrow. He had promised himself never to tie his life to anyone's again. Yet now, in this quiet valley, things had changed without him planning them to. When he turned around, Nalin was there, standing a few steps away. She was holding a clay jar in her hands, ready to collect water. The light touched her face gently, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then she smiled, a small, shy smile that said more than words ever could. John nodded, unsure what to say. She filled the jar and turned to go, but before she left, she said softly, "You stay." Her voice carried a quiet certainty, as if she already knew the answer he hadn't yet found. Over the next few days, John tried to understand what his life would be now. The tribe went on with their routines. Men repairing tools, women weaving baskets, children laughing near the river. John helped wherever he could. He built fences, fixed saddles, and repaired the water troughs for their horses. Every evening, when the sun sank into the horizon, he would sit by the fire, and Nalin would sit near him, sometimes speaking, sometimes just being there. They did not share the same language completely, but they understood each other through gestures and quiet looks. When he laughed, she smiled. When she sang, he listened. And slowly something began to grow between them. Not forced, not hurried, but real. One afternoon, Chief Taza came to John while he was mending a wooden beam near the camp. The old man sat beside him without saying a word for a long time. Then he spoke in his slow, careful English. "You think much," he said. John looked up. "Yes, I'm trying to understand all this." The elder nodded. "You have kind heart. You fight for what is right. You save my tribe. You saved my daughter's life, too." John looked at him in surprise. Her life? The chief nodded again. She was near the fire that day. The ones who came would have taken her if not for you. He looked out at the horizon. A father never forgets that. John said nothing. He felt a lump in his throat and lowered his eyes. The elder smiled. My people see you now. You not stranger anymore. You are family. The word sank deep into John's heart. Family, a word he hadn't heard spoken to him in years. He looked around at the camp, at the people who now greeted him with quiet nods and friendly smiles. For the first time, he felt truly part of something again. That evening, a soft wind carried the smell of cedar and sage through the camp. The tribe prepared a small gathering, not for ceremony or show, but for peace. A meal was shared, laughter flowed, and stories were told. John sat beside Naylan, who wore a simple white cloth around her shoulders, her hair braided neatly with small beads that shimmered in the firelight. As the night deepened, the elder stood and spoke to his people in his own tongue. His voice was calm but full of emotion. When he finished, he placed his hand on John's shoulder and then on Naylan's. The meaning was clear even without translation. It was not a grand wedding like in cities, but it was true. The people sang softly, and the sound of the drums echoed like a heartbeat across the valley. Naylan looked at John and whispered, "Now, we are one." John nodded, unable to find words. He had not planned for love. It had found him quietly, like the wind that moves through tall grass, soft but certain. The days that followed were gentle and full. John built a small home of wood and stone near the river, with help from the young men of the tribe. It was simple, a roof strong enough for rain, walls that kept the cool air inside, and a small fire pit where Naylan cooked meals. She planted corn beside the house and sang as she worked, her voice carrying softly over the water. John would watch her sometimes from a distance. He admired her patience, the way she moved, the way she spoke kindly to everyone. He began to learn her language, and she taught him words with laughter in her eyes. He called her name often, liking how it sounded in his mouth. Their life settled into rhythm. In the mornings, John worked with the men to gather supplies or fix tools. In the afternoons, he and Naylan would walk by the river, sometimes talking, sometimes just holding hands as the wind brushed against them. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, watching the stars appear one by one until the whole sky glowed above them. One day, a group of travelers passed through the area. They stopped by the camp asking for food and water. When they saw John, they were surprised to find a white man living among the Apache. One of them asked, "Aren't you afraid to stay here?" John smiled and shook his head. "No. These people gave me a home when I had none." When the travelers left, he stood for a long time, watching the dust of their horses fade into the horizon. He realized then that he no longer belonged to the road. His wandering days were over. That night, Naylan came and sat beside him. She noticed his thoughtful look and asked, "You think of leaving?" He turned to her with a small smile. "No, I think of staying forever." She looked into his eyes and nodded. "Then you are home." The seasons passed and their life grew fuller. The corn sprouted tall, the river stayed clear, and laughter often filled the air. When storms came, they held each other close inside their small home, waiting for the rain to pass. When the sun returned, they stepped out hand in hand, thankful for another day. John learned to ride with the Apache, to hunt, to read the clouds, and to listen to the earth. He became part of their stories, their traditions, and their laughter. The tribe began to call him brother. Chief Taza often said, "The desert tests men. It does not lie. It shows who they truly are. And you, John Miller, are one of us." Years later, their first child was born, a boy with his father's eyes and his mother's calm smile. The tribe celebrated, singing through the night. The elder held the baby in his arms and looked at John with pride. "Your blood and ours are one now," he said. "You saved a tribe once. Now you help it live." Time moved gently, as it always does in places far from the noise of the world. John sometimes thought back to the day he first rode into that valley, tired and alone. He remembered the fear, the dust, the sound of cries in the air, and then he would look around at what his life had become: a home, a wife, a family, a tribe, and he knew that some paths, though unexpected, lead exactly where a man is meant to be. On quiet evenings, when the firelight flickered on the walls and Naylan sang softly to their child, John would close his eyes and listen. He no longer felt like a stranger. The land had accepted him. The people had trusted him. Love had found him where he least expected it. Sometimes, he would still hear Chief Taza's words in his mind, the same words that had changed everything. "You saved my tribe, now I give you my daughter as a wife." But now, when he remembered them, they no longer sounded like a promise or a surprise. They sounded like destiny. And under the endless stars of the Arizona night, John Miller finally found peace.